Okay, so now today we're going to be talking about the six big ideas of the Constitution. So if you think about the Constitution as the ideas that are inherent to the basic principles of American government. Okay, so think about the Constitution like the foundation to the building being the United States of America. And if you think about the Constitution as the foundation, then what's below that are six concepts. They're not written, directly into the Constitution. You're not going to see these words anywhere exactly. But what you are going to see is how the ideas themselves do in fact play out in the Constitution itself. So let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. So we have six main ideas. The first one is popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is the idea that ultimately power rests with the people in the United States. And actually, this is the one that you see most closely, I guess, word for word in the Constitution, because the phrase "we the people" is the opening phrase of the Constitution. So this is the way in which the government itself should be reflexive to the needs of the American people. And I know that that's going to sound common sense for a government, but you have to remember that at the time, when we're talking about 1787, 1789, 1791, in this time period, the vast majority of governments in the world were not responsive to their populations. They were responsive to maybe the king, the queen, and a small cabal or group of individuals, perhaps the elites of the country in some way, shape, or form. But remember, when this Constitution is created, France hasn't even gone through its revolution yet. So we're in a situation where the United States is truly unique. So the idea that the power is vested in the people of a country, that is a new idea when the Constitution is created. The next idea is a limited government. So limited government is an important concept for the way that the United States functions still today. So the opposite to think about this would be an authoritarian government, all right? So think about Russia, think about Iran, think about China to an extent. The government in those countries has complete autonomy to do whatever it wants to do in its citizens' lives. We do not have that in the United States. All right. In the United States, we're dealing with a limited government. So the government can only do what we say that it can do and nothing more. All right. So its powers are expressly stated. And if those powers are not granted to the government, then there is, in fact, no right for the government to take that particular action, okay? And our rights are protected in a variety of ways in the Constitution, but one of the most important ways is this idea that if the Constitution doesn't say the government can do it, then the government can't do it. And that's the idea behind limited government. So let's go on to our next concept here. If we take a look at separation of powers. So separation of powers, and this is where things get a little bit wonky, because we're going to talk about separation of powers and then checks and balances. And it's really common for people to get these two things confused. But separation of powers is, I want you to imagine a freeway, and that freeway has 3 lanes in it. The difference between this freeway and a normal one is that you're actually not allowed to move between the 3 lanes. Once you're in the center lane, you must stay there. Once you're in the left lane, you must stay there, and so on and so forth. That's the idea behind separation of powers, that you can't go between the different spaces. The legislative branch can only make the laws. The executive branch can only enforce the laws. The judicial branch can only interpret the laws. The executive branch can't make the laws, okay? Now, there's going to be exceptions to this when we get deeper into the course, and I'll talk about executive actions and executive agreements, but those are a little bit different, and frankly, they're much more of a modern phenomenon. But for right now, the idea really is everybody has to stay in the lane that they were assigned. Now, that's different from checks and balances, okay? Checks and balances is the idea that different parts of the government should be effectively allowed to prevent other parts of the government from doing something, all right? So not only do you have to stay in your lane, but on top of having to stay in your lane, you can actually reach over into the other person's lane, grab the wheel, and prevent them from taking a specific action. And the easiest way to understand this is to look at some of the examples that we have up on the board here today. The executive, our president, can veto legislation. Now, Congress, which is our legislative branch, can override that veto. That's another check and balance. And of course, the courts can declare laws unconstitutional. Now, it is important to remember, as we'll get into, that that power is actually not stated in the Constitution, and it's part of Marbury versus Madison. We call it judicial review, but it is a check and balance nonetheless. Now, moving on is this idea of federalism. Now, there are federal countries throughout the world that are not the United States of America. So this is not an American concept at all right? This is an idea that was started in the United States, but it's not an American sole concept now today. Nigeria has a federal system. Russia has asymmetrical federalism. So there's other federal states. In a federal situation, not all the power is concentrated in one government. It's shared. It's spread out. So our federal government in Washington, D.C. has some powers, but our states have powers too, okay? So there is no, let's say, federal family court system. The court system for family law, adoptions, divorces, child support, all that sort of stuff, that's handled at the state level, right? And not at all at the federal level. Now, when the United States started, the balance of that power was firmly in the hands of the states. Over the centuries, that dynamic has shifted considerably as power has gone away from the states and toward the federal government. And of course, we also have local governments that have their own concerns with them. Compare this to a country like the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, there are no states, there are no districts. All the laws come out of Westminster in London. Parliament issues all the laws for the entire country. That's different from a federal power sharing structure like we see in the United States. Our next is the idea of republicanism. This has nothing to do with the parties, by the way, okay? The idea of a modern Democratic Party and a modern Republican Party, that you have to put that out of your mind for right now. Republicanism is just simply representative voting, okay? So there's two forms of democracy. There's direct democracy and there's indirect democracy. In a direct democracy, every single voting person would vote on every single issue that comes before the country. So every time Congress passes a law, if we had a direct democracy, what would happen is, in fact, every single time that Congress had to pass a law, you, I, any other voting member of the United States would go to vote on that. Now, that's, of course, incredibly cumbersome and time-consuming. And so there are no real modern systems of direct democracy for any large sort of government nowadays. We have referendums, but that's something I'll get into on another lecture. In republicanism, the idea is that we're going to have an indirect democracy. So I vote for someone, maybe they win. If they win, they go to Washington or they go to the state capitol and they vote on my behalf. That's the core idea of republicanism. We have people in Congress, we have people in Senate, we have a president. They're all supposed to take actions in our best interests, that is, as citizens of the United States. Whether or not they do that is an argument we could have for a different day, but that's the core idea behind republicanism. Regardless, we all have a role in creating these things and making sure that they happen. Because at the end of the day, remember that our core principle, our core belief here is the idea that we are here to make this country work. And we need to bear in mind that we, the people, that first line of the Constitution, it only means something if we all work together.